Hi and welcome. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm presenting from South Australia and on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. I extend my respect to elders past and present. Today, Ardi and I will be sharing insight on a systems thinking approach to reducing single-use plastics and household organic waste. My name is Vanessa Salamoni and I'm undertaking my honours research with social marketing at Griffith. Our project explores stakeholder knowledge of initiatives that can be implemented to reduce single-use plastics in the supermarket service environment. Complex or wicked social issues are typically not clearly defined. The pathway towards sustainable solutions is always a work in progress, requiring multifaceted and long-term approaches. There really is no silver bullet. The solution may in fact create a new problem that in turn requires an alternative solution. A systems view is one that considers the interrelationship across all levels of society, government, business and citizens. For this study, we explore the internal and external mechanisms that can facilitate the desired change downstream to the end user. This project is underpinned by systems thinking, seeking to understand how supermarket retailers in South Australia can reduce single-use plastics in the service environment. The complex system frameworks you see on your screen has been developed to provide clear steps towards understanding wicked social problems. It is a 7-step process that starts with a broad examination of the problem to determine the focal system of interest, geographical location, and project learning objectives. Next, we immerse ourselves in the system itself to build relationships and knowledge that essential for identifying and conceptualising sectors, stakeholders, key decision makers and past initiatives. Strategic partnerships are formed so that conceptual maps draw from the experience and knowledge professionals working within the ecosystem, co-creating a comprehensive visual artefact for all. The process is iterative, building understanding that is used to inform the next step. Once industry groups, organisations and single-use plastic initiatives are visualised, key decision makers' level of interest and influence is assessed prior to recruiting the sample population for depth interviews. Insights during the process combined with an holistic understanding of the barriers, facilitators and possible solutions to minimising plastic waste in supermarkets. So to give you some context around the problem, annually hundreds of millions of tonnes of plastic enters waste streams, of which plastic packaging constitutes more than half. The amount of plastic leaking into marine environments actually equates to a garbage truckload of plastic being dumped in the ocean every 38 seconds. Just for a moment, I want you to pause to think about your weekly grocery shopping trip. I bet you'll find it almost impossible to identify food products that are not stored, transported or collected in single-use plastics. Even if you wanted to, do you believe that the supermarket service environment would facilitate a plastic-free shopping experience for you? In most cases, and particularly in Australia, this is a no. The escalating societal and environmental costs associated with excessive plastic pollution is recognised as a critical priority for the Government of South Australia. Behavioural economics in the form of bans and fees, stakeholder collaboration and plastic-free pilot precinct trials are some mechanisms that have been employed to reduce single-use plastics. To illustrate, new legislative measures outlined in the Single-Use and Other Plastic Products Waste Avoidance Bill are initially targeting plastic stirrers, straws, cutlery, as well as a variety of polystyrene products. More bans are due to be implemented in the not too distant future. Also, packaging targets are set to have 100% of packaging recycled, reused or compostable by 2025. Collaborative stakeholder engagement are key components so that governments and industry alike can transition to a more circular plastic packaging system. Unfortunately, though, COVID has in many cases halted efforts to reduce single-use plastics, with consumption soaring, bans being delayed and recycling halted during the height of the pandemic. Clearly, there really is no time to waste and we must continue to move forward. The lifestyle of packaging is really complex, involving multiple stakeholders from design to the end-of-life disposal. Packaging complements the product's lifestyle, ensuring safe delivery, storage, hygiene, and product longevity. Yet new approaches, skills and knowledge throughout the supply chain are needed if we are to move towards a sustainable future. To understand how to transition to more circular packaging systems, we must begin by visualising the packaging value chain. In the past, policy changes traditionally rely on motivating citizens to adopt the desired behaviour. But as we've seen in plastic bag bans, it's really hard to change these habitual behaviours at scale. Sometimes the broader environmental and contextual factors may actually inhibit the behaviour change. So a shift in focus upstream is required to ensure that optimal external conditions exist. This is the approach taken in this study, identifying relevant supply chain actors necessary to inform the next step of the process. Visualising stakeholder groups and organisations is used to plan and operationalise the sample framework for interviews. Participants are chosen to provide breadth, depth and saliency within data analysis and reporting so that new insights as well as a rich understanding of plastic-free service design can be established. Stakeholder theory is used to ensure a diverse range of viewpoints are obtained during this research study. So I'm not quite sure if you can see all the detail of this map, but this is the process that has been undertaken with some key partners to map out the relevant organisations within 9 stakeholder groups. The groups that have been selected are government, academia, environmental and circular economy NGOs and not-for-profits, supermarket retailers and supermarket retailers who have innovative plastic-free initiatives from not just within South Australia but the UK and Europe, fast-moving consumer goods wholesalers, manufacturers, packaging retail groups, and waste management, of which collection and recycling organisations are also identified. So the stakeholder process involved researching, observing and engaging in the system. That was through webinars, accessing online news articles and so forth. Leveraging the research team's professional networks and developing strategic partnerships with influential stakeholder groups. Co-creating the stakeholder map with stakeholder mapping and cross-checking to the sample framework with industry partners. And then finally, we move on to recruiting the sample. So recruiting and interviewing has begun. Executive level decision makers from within supermarket retail recycling, sustainable packaging and government have been interviewed so far. Preliminary findings suggest that cost to small independent retailers is a massive barrier. This extends beyond restructuring and includes costs associated with contamination of food through BYO container models. Lack of innovation, recycling technology that is able to viably recycle all forms of plastics, like the black trays you see under meat, is needed. In relation to soft plastics, demand is outpacing recycling. If we talk about some of the solutions, that includes partnering with councils to offer compostable produce bags, and the council supplies the caddy for the organic waste for the consumer. Reusable models like Loop will be trialled in Woolworths in 2021, and Coles have implemented refill stations for nuts and dry products. So with that, it's clear that the interview process is beginning, and there really is so much more to do and learn. However, as the data comes in, we're looking forward to combining and categorising the findings. To learn more about this project and others, follow our centre on social media, where we share our research progress and outcomes with you all as they come in. Thank you for listening, and now over to Arti.
So my presentation is on application of systems thinking to understand multi-stakeholder perspectives and engagement in solid waste management. And today I'll be sharing some of the preliminary findings from GRE literature review. My study is particularly based on small island developing nations, and I'm particularly interested in some of the developing island states within the South Pacific region. Now, there's a common thread across all small island developing states, which is in terms of their resource constraints, their land size, as well as their small populations, as well as their human resource capabilities, financial constraints, and the most important one is the effect of climate change and the time it takes for small island developing nations to recover from natural disasters. Now, with this in mind, solid waste management protocols and applications becomes of prime importance, simply because unsustainable practices presents more financial constraints on already limited financial capabilities of the local government as well as the federal government. We have taken a systematic approach to our research, and one of the key issues when people hear about systems thinking is, why did you adopt this particular approach? Now, a little bit of our research literature review indicates that practitioners often tend to focus narrowly on a specific segment of the population, and sometimes we forsake the need to conduct formative research, either in terms of the population itself or the problem itself. So with a systems thinking approach, what happens is that we take a much holistic approach to scrutinizing the problem at hand. So if we look at the socio-ecological model, I think this gives us a better indication of the different layers of factors that come into play when human behavior is involved. I like this model in particular because it recognizes that individuals are in fact interconnected with different layers within the system. So for instance, within the microsystem, we have an interplay of households, especially within the context of solid waste management, we have households that interact with communities, neighbors, schools, the workplace, and at the macro level, we have the influence of policies, the economy, as well as the infrastructure that has been set in place for that particular context. Because I'm from a social marketing background, I thought to sort of synchronize the social ecological system with the social marketing applications in this particular context. So if we look at any research that targets on households alone, there's a tendency for practitioners to often utilize what we call downstream social marketing. Now, the problem with downstream social marketing is that it places the individuals as the culprit of behavior. So that means it underpins individuals as being the cause of the behavior, rather than looking at the individual within the whole, within the entire system. So what we are proposing, and also what the social ecological framework proposes, is that human behavior is interconnected within the different layers of the system. Now, in this case, if we look at the positioning of the households, you can see it operates within the community. With on the layer beyond the community, we have the influence of corporations, and beyond that, we have the political, economical, and social ecological system operating as well. Now, from a social marketing perspective, we can propose to use a multi-stream approach, which recognizes that midstream social marketing can be used to target independent organizations or corporations. Or at the community level, there is an option to utilize community-based social marketing. And at the upstream level, there's the option to utilize upstream social marketing as well. Now, my research in particular looks at consumer or user insights into sustainable solid waste management. So the approach I have taken is that I have systematically analyzed social media articles. Now, in this particular case, we focused specifically on newspaper articles to identify responses from the public. So this means citizens, as well as stakeholders, as well as the journalists. We thought this would provide us with a deep insight into what the public perception and the level of engagement was in terms of sustainable solid waste management. And this is what our preliminary findings indicate. The factors that are highlighted in green are the most prominent ones. And this took us by surprise, simply because at the beginning of our research, there was this understanding that policies or regulations might have a deep impact upon the uptake of sustainable solid waste management practices, but our findings actually defy our own personal biases. So our preliminary findings indicate that although we can have different types of solid waste management promulgations, as well as different types of waste management acts and legislations, the bottom line is, without enforcement, the uptake on the public tends to be quite low. I will be discussing each of these factors in my upcoming slides. So we'll start with the first one. In terms of citizen perspectives, one of our key findings from the media articles was that negligence was one of the root causes of unsustainable solid waste management practices. When I talk about unsustainable practices, this encompasses pollution, littering, and dumping. Now, I analyzed some of the major themes that emerged from the newspaper articles, and on the right-hand side, you can note some of the quotes. I think given the time constraints, I cannot cover all these citations, so I'm just going to briefly present on the summary notes. So within the microsystem, the most prominent findings from my research was that littering as well as dumping is a result of negligence, as well as a lack of civic pride and personal responsibility. Now, within the media articles, I also noticed that despite the criticisms people have in terms of why unsustainable practices happen, there is also a high level of community engagement as well. And this was reflected in terms of youth's engagement in cleanup campaigns, as well as community engagement in cleanup campaigns. Now, another fascinating finding was that each year during national level events, the government tends to promote Clean Schools program, which is often quite popular amongst the tertiary level as well as the high school level within that school environment. Another notable finding was that in some metropolitan areas, there is a trend which looks at the neighborhood watch. For instance, if there's a placement of a skip bin, there tends to be greater responsibility. Now, this equates to personal as well as community responsibility in terms of monitoring and reporting of illegal practices within the community. Now, this is also another interesting finding from my research, is the level of engagement from the corporate sector. So we found that business corporations, as well as the civic sector organizations, NGOs, as well as religious organizations, took an active role in terms of engaging and advocating for sustainable solid waste practices, as well as this was reflected in the actions as well. Now, the most prominent...
Minute warning, sorry.
Sorry, Alex, noted. The most prominent one was cleanup campaigns, which was explicitly demonstrated by some of these independent organizations. Now, in terms of the service providers, there was a dissonance between citizen as well as council expectations. Now, this was another interesting finding, simply because the municipal councils had an entirely different perspective when compared with the citizen expectations. In terms of the macro level, the government has set in place different policies and regulations to monitor illegal activities, but our findings suggest that there was a lack of enforcement, which resulted in people recklessly dumping the household waste in rivers as well as on vacant land. Now, in terms of the way forward, we propose through our findings that there needs to be more collaboration between the policymakers, citizens, as well as the stakeholders. And I think one of the major findings would be a creation of a think tank whereby people can contribute their thoughts as well as their proposals to the policymakers. I think this would make a long-term impact in terms of creating more sustainable protocols that can be implemented by different stakeholders. Just to sum up, I know my time is up. I think this research points out that the voice of the customer as well as the voice of the stakeholders is prominent, and it should be incorporated in any interventions or strategies that are implemented at the national scale. Thank you very much.